Alex.
Hi, Jean. Good
This
to
is
meet
Scharl.
There's Nicole.
Hello, I'm ready to launch. Can you tell?
You're coming to us from outer
Oh,
space.
there you are.
So Richard is in Tacoma, Washington. I'm in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Alex, you're in California.
Yeah, I'm in California. Yeah, that's right. San Jose.
Nicole is here in New England.
Yes, Trumbull, Connecticut. So that's about an hour outside of New York City with no traffic.
Kathy, are you in Canada?
Can I be heard in?
I'm in Saint Lazare, Quebec.
Hello.
Ah, bonjour.
Nicole, you look like you're speaking to us from a nearby planet.
Yeah.
It's because it's a launch party, Barbara, right?
Oh.
We're on 4/3/21. I hope you're all strapped in and ready because we're almost ready to launch.
Very good.
That'd be something.
That's why I'm wearing my shiny space suit here.
Oh,
Cool.
At
Very
least
cool.
I launched in it. Let's see.
A launch party. That's really good. Very good.
Well, it is 4/3/21, right? So it's 4/3/21.
Yes.
yeah.
Perfect day for a launch.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sure Alex had that in mind.
Oh, good.
I hope that doesn't mean that tomorrow is the apocalypse.
Who knows? It's anyone's guess at this point.
Right. Wow. 4/3/21.
Yeah. And now we have blast off.
That's right.
Yeah.
for our lovely Able Muse. Well, actually, I'm trying to show
Yeah.
the issue, but it's disappearing in the ether
Right.
Yeah.
with all my little Post-it notes in it. The issue.
There you go.
Very pretty cover.
Yes.
Alex, do you take these wonderful photos for the covers?
Sometimes I do it, but not always. Not this one. This one is someone else's photo.
How many readers do we have this afternoon?
Well, how about
11?
7? Well, readers. Okay. We're still missing some readers, huh?
This is Jane Scharl. I'm calling in from a phone number, so I'm not going to show up, but I'm here.
Okay, great, Jane.
I see John Beaton there. We're only a couple 100 miles apart, I think. You're up on Vancouver Island, isn't that right, John?
Just trying to, yes, that's right. Not too far from you.
Yeah. So if you walk down to the beach from our house, you can paddle right up to your house, I think.
Oh, if you've got a kayak.
Yeah. Right.
As I'm looking at the list of people signed on, it looks like we're almost all here. I don't see Nageen signed in yet.
Yeah, I don't see Nageen also.
Nicole, I haven't seen you for a long time. I remember vividly your performance at the open mic when that cellist was Westchester.
The Wonder Woman rap with Ernst
Yeah,
Reichs.
you're pretty talented.
Thank you. I remember at Westchester, I was attending a reading where you were doing entirely memorized versions of your poems, and it was amazing. So I'm looking forward very much to hearing your performance today and getting some pointers. Alex was kind enough to ask me to host this, and even though I have been on Zoom many times, I have never actually been responsible for hosting a Zoom event. So I hope all goes smoothly, and then if it doesn't, you all forgive me. Alex, do you know if Nageen's gonna be logging on? Or?
I just email him, so if he doesn't show, maybe he should just start without him, and he could, if he shows up, he can read towards the end. I don't know.
Okay, so he was going to be
The first.
our first reader, but I could always just bump that and we can improvise if
That's
he
right.
manages to log on.
And I don't see Karen either. Oh, is Karen here?
Oh no, I did. I could have sworn that I did see Karen.
Karen.
Let
Well, if
me-
Karen is not here, you can take over.
Okay, I'm just looking at the attendance list. I thought that I saw her, but I am mistaken.
Oh, Nageen is here now. I see
Oh,
him.
here. Okay.
Okay, I see Nageen.
Okay, so are we ready to begin?
Yes,
Yep.
we are.
Okay. Welcome to the launch reading and Q&A with the contributors of Able Muse 28. I am your host, Associate Poetry Editor Nicole Caruso Garcia, joining you from Trumbull, Connecticut. This May will be my 5-year anniversary with Able Muse, and it continues to be a joy to work with the gentleman I am delighted to now introduce to you, the man without whom none of this would be possible, Alexander Pepple. Alex founded and edits Able Muse and Able Muse Press, and also founds and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His poetry and prose have been published in journals such as Barrow Street, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Per Contra, La Petite Scene, and San Pedro River Review. He edited the Able Muse anthology from Able Muse Press, and in it you will find writing by some of our readers today, Richard Wakefield, Estill, Pollock, and John Beaton. Take it away, Alex.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Very good to see everyone here today, and I'm glad we will have an international showing, which actually rhymes with our theme for the fiction for the issue, which was an international fiction theme. And so we'll have readers today from as far away as India and the UK, and some of them from right here in the US. So it was a joy to bring this issue to you, and I'm sure this will be a great reading. So Nicole, take it away. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alex. If you don't already have a subscription to Able Muse, please go to ablemuse.com and subscribe. And don't forget to submit. Our submissions are open and will be open till July 15th. Is that correct, Alex? July 15th, right?
That's right. That's right. That's correct.
Okay. Just a couple of words first about the way our structure will work today. After each reader, we're going to have a brief initial question and answer session where the section editor and myself will have a question or two for each reader. And then at the end, we'll have a follow-up question and answer for everyone to ask questions of any of the readers or any of the editors. Before we start the readers, I will mute everyone so we don't get any feedback or background noise. If you would be so kind as to just unmute yourself before you read. So in other words, as you're being introduced, if you would unmute yourself, which is easy to do by just looking, hovering your mouse in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a little microphone and you can unmute yourself there. That would help. And don't worry, because if you forget, I will just unmute you for you. All of the readers in the respective sections will be introduced by the section, the editor of the corresponding section. Was Karen able to join us yet? Karen, are you there?
I don't see her. You want me to?
Okay,
Well,
so I can
you
do
can-
introductions for that section then. Okay.
That's right.
And also, I sent everyone a list of the order of readers, but it couldn't hurt to just go over it again right now real quick, just so you're familiar. Our first reader will be Nageen Rather, followed by L.M. Brown, followed by N.S. Thompson, Estill Pollock, Dan Campion, J.C. Scharl. Anna Evans will be joining us via a pre-recorded video since she had a family matter she had to attend to today, but still wanted to read for us, so that'll be great. And then for number 8, we've got Bruce Bennett, 9, Barbara Leidecker Crane, 10, John Beaton, and last but not least, Susan McLean. Okay, so our first section is going to be fiction. Welcome Nageen Rather. He is a short story writer and aspiring novelist, born and brought up in Kashmir, India occupied. He teaches fiction at Islamic University of Science and Technology, Awantipora, Pulwama. His stories have appeared in various literary journals and magazines of international repute. His debut novel, Handcuffed to History, is upcoming soon. He loves gardening and bird watching. And so now I'm going to mute everyone. And we will hear Nageen's story, A View from Kashmir. Welcome, Nageen.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for hosting this show. And I am going to read from a story, A View from Kashmir. So I read it from the beginning. So can I read the parts, or I have to read from the beginning?
If you would like to read parts, feel free to read parts.
Okay, okay. So I can, first of all, I will read from the beginning. So they lived at Gulshanpora, a beautiful village of Pulwama district in the Kashmir Valley. Despite poverty, Ibrahim's family of 6 living in a single-story house had more common joys than sorrows. He and his wife, Sarvat, felt richer when they had their children around them because their family was their treasure. We are thankful to Allah for all He gave us. Our family is everything to us, a big gift of Allah, both believed thanking God. It was a bright and beautiful morning in the kitchen. All the family huddled about to sip the hot noon chai, salty pink tea. The tea prepared by Sarvat never lacked magic. One single sip from the hot cup was a heavenly experience. Even her daughters knew how much their grandfather liked the kahwa she made for him. Kahwa is a special Kashmiri beverage. Let me tell you this thing. So what is kahwa and how it is made? A Kashmiri woman knows that since she is in her mother's womb. But when my Sarvat Lal makes it, I don't just taste it. I feel it in my body as its fragrance rejuvenates each and every tendon of my soul. The grandfather told his daughter, Zara, a few days before his death. Sarvat, sitting beside the hot samovar, blew a mouthful of air into its chimney, dropping the copper lid with a clank. Ibrahim regarded his family, his son, Samir, his son Samir sitting to his left, his 2 daughters, Zara and Zainab, to his right, and his wife, Sarvat, in front of him, gave him ample joy. Sarvat poured tea into a cup for her son, the leaping steam spreading milky. Ibrahim, holding a flowered cup like Sarvat, sat comfortably. Through the window panes, the morning sun scattered rays across the middle of the kitchen and caressed the samovar. Carved with chinar and almond leaves in the light, it seemed embedded with diamonds, a gift to Sarvat by some friends from a fairyland. The kitchen was partitioned into house by a knee-high brick wall, sitting side and cooking side. Sarvat kept her spice-filled glass jars on white tiled shelf over the mud oven. So this is how the, actually I'm going to read another part from the later part of the story. So how it goes, how it feels like, so that you can have a feel of what is happening in Kashmir. All the shopkeepers were standing in front of their shops waiting. A few rumors were making the rounds. Ibrahim recalled the newspaper headline he read in the Somo. It was not long before the arrival of Rakshaks, armored jeeps of the Special Task Force. Then the police and Central Paramilitary Force are rushing into the market, there to kill the mobs and eliminate militants. The jeeps looked as if they had been beaten with hammers targeted by the stone throwing. They had stubble in the wood stood, uncountable dents revealing rust where their white paint had scraped off, none of the stones managing to pierce the iron bodies. Armed men wearing leg guards and kneecaps jumped down in a hurry and moving together began to shoo people away. In a jiffy, all the streets were emptied. In the awful silence, every charm of the street market disappeared. Some shops still had their shutters half down, some were wide open without a proprietor. The vendors had long disappeared, leaving their makeshift carts at the mercy of the market. A few people watched from their rooftops. Ibrahim heard a sharp sound. Forcibly tossed something rolled on the road, hitting the leg of a sleeping dog. The dog barked, rising, looking around and limping toward a lane. What could that be? One stone and then another hit the signboard in front of a grocery shop, thumping into a drain, splashing dirt. Ibrahim froze and wanted to hide. There no longer was any point in running away. As the stone throwers were getting closer to the forces, the boys' pockets were filled with stones. Without even taking time to aim, they hurled one rock after another. A hailstorm accompanied by incomprehensible noise. In a minute, you could not count the stones on the ground. Caught in the crossfire, Ibrahim felt like an old man cowering his head. He darted towards an ATM kiosk across the road, but it was locked. A shopkeeper whose shutters were half up called him inside, instantly pulling the shutters down. From inside the shop, Ibrahim could see nothing, but could hear sounds horrible and deafening all around. A group of boys, tall, short, weak, stout, their faces covered, were marching towards the forces. As they pelted the jeeps with stones, the armored men shot a dozen tear gas canisters at them. The smoke was blinding and smelled of pepper. Nara Takbir, a boy shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Allahu Akbar, other boys replied. Azadi ka matlab ka a guttural voice broke among them. La ilaha illallah, the boy shouted back. The shouting reached new boys running towards the group to join them. Within minutes, the small group swelled into a crowd, chanting ear-piercing slogans while they threw rocks. We want, a tall boy wearing a black t-shirt shouted, freedom. The other boys answered as one. Go India, a little boy cried, his voice strained. Go back. Other boys answered even more loudly. So this is the second part I choose to read. Do I have much more time?
I think yes, a little more time. Yes.
I would like to read the last part of the story. Okay. So what the family generally, have to face, considering the situation of Kashmir. Sarwat dialed Samir's phone for the third time. The number you are trying to reach is currently switched off, was the automatic reply. What if, she began, but the lower cry from their moving cow reached her. He must be in class. Allah will protect him, Ibrahim said. He will call us back when he gets free. Assalamu alaikum was heard from the door. Wa alaikum salam. Both answered quietly. What have you prepared? I mean vegetables, for lunch. It was Sarah, their neighbor. She carried an empty bowl. Tomatoes and cheese, said Sarwat, whose culinary skills were renowned among her neighbors. Her hands are worth their weight in gold, said those who tasted anything she cooked. Okay, give me some. I have cooked potatoes. My son Manzoor does not like them. He wanted something made by you. Sarwat reached for a spoon from the wall then removed the lid of the pot. A sumptuous aroma filled the kitchen. She stirred the dish and filled the bowl to the brim, handing it to Sarah. She headed outside to give some grass to the cow, and Sarah followed her. Sarah told Sarah all that Ibrahim told her. What must the mother be doing? Said Sarah. Ibrahim said the boy's suckle just split and his brains had come out. Such reports are a blade in the heart, Sarvat said with a shudder. Please say nothing more, my heart turns upside down when I hear such news. Sarah's eyes stunk. She placed her left hand on her breast. Ibrahim said the boy was just 15. Sarah, nobody cares, no one. I am worried about my Manzoor and your Samir. Both of them are hot-headed. Still thinking of the unanswered phone call, Sarvat did not reply. It was hard to tell which woman had the greater grief and fear. Perhaps even Khuda is indifferent to us. Sarah sobbed. Hopelessness is kufr, especially for us. Oh, the cow is lowing loud. I have to feed it. Sarvat walked a step or two towards the cowshed. If there was a guest, there was no need to go to a shop to buy a dry milk packet to swish into liquid. The creamy top layer of the milk at home was enough. Can you tell me how much milk it gives a day? Sarah asked. Around 10 liters. 5 goes to the market, the rest we consume at home. Go feed it. Now I understand why your daughters are so pretty with white glowing faces. Sarah joked. What do you mean? I don't get you. Since you feed your daughters an abundance of pure milk, they are beautiful. Milk shows on their faces. Poor daughters need to be pretty. Rich ones get husbands because of their money. The poor ones because of their beauty. Sarvat said with a little smile. Well, if you get your Zainab married after my Manzoor, I will demand no dowry. Sarah was joking. Done. But her beauty demands an exorbitant meher. You will have to sell all your land. Sarvat was also laughing now. I am confident your daughter will attract rich households. Not if this killing spree continues. God forbid. If it goes on like this, parents will have no takers for their daughters. Only a handful of boys will be left. A housefly hummed and landed on the bowl Sarah carried. She shooed it away and the bowl shook, the aroma of garlic filling the air. Back in the kitchen, Ibrahim told Sarvat that Samir had called. It felt pleasurable then to eat lunch and for Sarvat to wash the utensils, mop and clean the kitchen. Then Ibrahim had his namaz and left for the apple orchard to bring in more grass for the cow. It had been a few days since she had walked in a small patch of land, which he cultivated as an apple orchard, bringing in some additional income. The grass in the orchard was mowed to give to the cow. This little land was a place where the family could share their small burdens. Sarvat, done with cleaning the kitchen, was anxious for her children to come home. Would they return early or would it take longer today? There my eyes was her lovingly held belief. Outside, she collected from the wire the clothes that she had washed in the morning. First, she took in Ibrahim's and hers. They smelled of rinse soap. As she pulled down those of her children, she felt like kissing them. She kept them in her arms and went straight to Samir's room. But when she closed the door, it occurred to her that she had to take them to her room instead. She slapped her forehead and slammed the door. In her room, she saw a picture of Makkah on the wall. She dropped the clothes down lazily and looked at it. She raised her hands towards it, contrite. She prayed, "Ay man Khudai Kashmir kartan ye mein zulm nish azad." Oh my God, set Kashmir free of this oppression. Thank you. This is the story.
Thank you very much, Nageen. Okay, can everyone hear me? I was trying to unmute everyone.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me. I was trying to unmute.
You can't unmute everyone. You can suggest it. Zoom doesn't allow it for security reasons. So you just.
Oh, okay. Oh, I can't unmute everyone. Okay, so we can do visual applause.
No, but you can tell everyone to unmute and
Okay, if you wish, you can unmute yourselves right now and we'll do a round of applause.
Nice,
Thank you very much.
really nice. And it was easy to follow in the book, in the magazine.
And Nageen, I have a question for you. This piece contains both kinetic and potential violence in it. And I'm most drawn, I think, then to the way that you temper that by bookending the story with beauty and tenderness. And you did end up reading two of my favorite parts of the story, which are early on, we have the tea and we have the samovar, which in the light seems to be embedded with diamonds, a gift to Sarwat by some friend from a fairyland. And that is a gorgeous part of the story. Then toward the end, as she takes in the clean laundry of her children, she feels like kissing the clothes. I love both of those images so much. My question for you is, what is your favorite part of the story, whether it's a favorite aesthetically or thematically, or in any regard? Do you have a particular favorite part of this story?
So, my favorite part is, yes, like you said, that the first part is my favorite part because, we have a Kashmiri traditional tea, the beverage that we have, and we are talking about the kahwa. That is also a very popular Kashmiri beverage. So, considering those things, that you get a taste of the culture of the Kashmiri life, how the people live here, what are their beverages, what they take, and and the common, the poor sections of the people, and how do they manage their life, and where do they live, how their kitchens look like. So they are not, those sophisticated kind of kitchens. So this is, I actually like the first part of the story in the sense that it gives us a right feel of what Kashmir is, culture is, and how they, live by. And the second part that, yes, I will definitely go with you that the last part is very favorite, one of my favorite parts, in the sense that finally the mother, when she sniffs the clothes of the kids, it gets us into the detail that how the Kashmiri women, when they are, the housewives, when their children are away, how much they miss their kids because they're not sure whether they may return back or not safely. So considering that thing, the first part and the last part is very favorite, and the mother prays that the Kashmir should be free of all this oppression that is going on here, so that the children can come and go to school, they can come and go to college freely, and parents may not feel that much secured.
Thank you so much for reading your story and for answering my question, Nageen.
Thank you.
Our next reader is L.M. Brown. L.M. Brown is the author of the novels Debris and Hinterland and the short story collections We Were Awake and Treading the Uneven Road. She's been published in over a dozen literary magazines such as Eclectica, Litro, Fiction, Southeast, Toasted Cheese, The Chiron Review, and more. She grew up in Sligo, Ireland, but now lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 3 daughters. And she will be reading Is That Adele?, which won the 2020 Able Muse Write Prize for fiction. It's on page 52 if you would like to follow along. Welcome, Lorna.
Hi, thank you. I practiced a little bit, so won't go too fast. Okay, Is That Adele? Her in-laws live near the sea where the tide is often out and there's a strong smell of fish already dead. Children kick balls in the green towards the back of this housing estate, but it's quiet where the in-laws are. Once a month, Adele gets out of her car and closes the door gently. Not so much as a concern for the people in the house, but to gain a few moments before seeing them. She was 17 the first time she came to this house, laughing and giggling with the man who would soon be her husband, the two of them drunk on Guinness, stumbling into the hallway and up the stairs. The next morning she lay in his bed and heard him with his brother and sister. His brother and sister were laughing, and she felt her body as if it were twice the usual weight. She didn't know how she would leave that room and go downstairs. She was crying when he came up with tea and toast, and he held her and promised they had not been laughing at her. "Come say hello," he said, when a half-hour later, dressed and freshened up, she tried to sneak out. His grip on her hand was tight, and he brought her to the kitchen. The door is on the latch for her, as it always is, and she pushes it open and says hello. It's a similar feeling walking into the house for Sunday dinner as it was walking into the kitchen when she was 17. The house smells of roast beef. It's a brighter house than hers, with a larger window beside the front door, and she always feels exposed. There's a soccer game on the TV in the sitting room. Her brother-in-law is sitting forward on the couch. He looks at her, and he's not smiling like he was the first time she met him. His gaze had skimmed off her, and she'd seen the glance thrown to her husband, and at 17 she felt some vain pride in the look that was exchanged. Her brother-in-law nods and says hello. He's fair like her husband, but larger and more serious looking. "Is that Edel?" her father-in-law says. "It is." She peeks around the door to the man who has gotten a lot older looking in the last year. He winks, and she thinks neither of his sons are like him. Her mother-in-law is standing by the kitchen table. She is wearing her apron and red-faced from cooking. The table is set, though Edel's sister-in-law isn't here. She got married 8 months ago. Edel brought her best friend Maeve to the wedding, and they sat at the family table. In the hotel bathroom, Edel asked her to slow it down on the wine. Maeve said it was the only way she was coping. "The whole arrangement's fucking weird." "Any word?" her mother-in-law says. This greeting never changes. Edel shakes her head. She's tired of this house and the brother-in-law who looks too much like her husband, and his father who will sit at the table and eat without a word and rise as soon as his plate is empty to go back to his throne by the fire. But mostly she's tired of his mother's hope. She knows all morning her mother-in-law imagined her son arriving with Edel. All morning she would have run around the house, making sure everything was perfect. If Edel went up to his room, as she did when she first started coming alone, when she needed quiet time and couldn't stand the confusion in his family's faces, she'd find the bed sheets newly washed and a shirt freshly ironed on the bed and new socks. No word. She walks to the sink and stares at the back garden where he would have played as a child with his brother and sister. There are photos of him on the walls with hair so fair it is white. He's always standing behind his brother and sister, being the older one. When Edel was pregnant 8 weeks, her mother-in-law sat her down at the kitchen table. It was winter and Edel was a month married. The darkness outside pressed in on them. She'd felt the blood rushing through her in a way that was foreign and made her lightheaded. The TV was on next door, but she'd never felt comfortable in that room, lounging with the boys while they drank beer. Her mother-in-law took the photos from the side cabinet in the kitchen, and Edel saw her husband as a small boy, his hair in a whiff and in a collared wool sweater, or outside in shorts with his soft black shoes, and later, older, in his leather jacket with a fullness coming to his face and his arms crossed, and that look coming to his eyes, as if saying to the photographer, "Go on then." Edel hadn't looked at anyone else in the photos. She'd studied her husband and tried to understand it. She'd wanted to ask the mother-in-law about her husband. Had the boy cried when he hurt himself? Had he come running to his mother? But she hadn't asked because she sensed a nervousness with the mother as she passed one photo after the other. There'd been the same nervousness when she'd visited Edel in hospital after the miscarriage. His mother had come alone and sat by the bed. She'd asked how Edel was, and Edel said okay, though she'd felt like a ghost in the bed. It was only after she was home that she thought his mother had come alone because she'd had something to say. There was that moment, the two women in a foreign hospital room, without photos of the past or any ties, and then it was gone.
Thank you. And everyone, if you'd like to unmute yourselves for a round of applause, we could do that.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Now that Karen Kevorkian is here, I'm going to introduce her because she probably has some questions for Lorna and possibly also for Nageen. So she is our fiction editor. Karen Kevorkian is Able Muse's longtime fiction editor whose poems, book reviews, and fiction are published in numerous journals. Presently teaching at UCLA, she has taught poetry and fiction writing there and at the University of Virginia. Her 3 poetry collections are White Stucco Black Wing, Lizard Dream, and in 2020, Quivira from 3A Taos Press. Welcome, Karen. We heard from Nageen and then we just heard Lorna's story. So if you have questions for either of them, that would be great. I'm just going to mute everyone, and Karen and Lorna, you can unmute yourselves. And Nageen, if there are questions for you as well, and that way we won't get any feedback.
Thank you. I was so impressed by your story, and I remembered the first time I'd read it and what a vivid impression its images made on me. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little more about the persona of that character, about how this character kind of seems to live on the edge of what she knows and what she doesn't know.
Well, the whole idea of the story came first with the idea of somebody going missing and just not knowing where they are or what's happening. But then what I ended up having was really the person that was left behind, and their life wasn't as nice or wasn't as good as people would suppose, you know. And this kind of, though he's missing, she's starting to find herself through his disappearance, you know, starting to realize things and starting to grow up. So I have 2 different stories in this. So I have another story that's the second part where she's actually the reason he's missing. So there's kind of, I kind of put it on its head there, but I just wanted her to be more of this kind of survivor of something. And it is about abuse, and it's really about, for me, it was about the 2 women, you know, and everything that was not said, you know, like, you know, not, you know, now that the husband's gone, she's able to look at the mother and say, why did you never say to me? Whereas before she wouldn't have thought about it so much, you know?
No, I thought you really beautifully captured the tension between those 2 women, you know, a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. And there's always a kind of defense on the part of the mother, no matter how much, you know, how much she accepts the daughter. It's still her son, and so the daughter is still a bit of an outsider. And I thought you made that you implied that beautifully. And I think the other thing that I felt very keenly, which I was just as glad that it wasn't explained and it was left to my imagination, was the cause for him leaving, because there was a sort of sense that there was, again, this kind of unwritten about tension between him and the wife.
I think it's, as a writer, I really believe in not really answering every question, leaving it up to the reader. I believe in this like little, I think it adds more, it does add more tension, because it's just, rather than just giving it, handing it, or you know, just to have the reader, because every reader will decide their own take on it, which, you know, adds to it.
Well, that's what we love. We love to, you know, enter the story and make it our own in some way. And if we don't have the answers, then that's what stays in the mind.
So that quote from Stephen King is, the imagination should start with the writer and end with the reader.
Yeah, I think Walter Benjamin said a thing or 2 about that as well. Well, thank you. I hope I get to read that second story.
Thank you.
I'd love to.
And Lorna, I have a question about the story as well. In a masterful story such as this, I suspect that there is no choice that is not absolutely deliberate, such as excluding Adele's current age? And I certainly don't expect like a firm answer now, but I was thinking about that because as we get older, we often become better at advocating for ourselves and being agents of our own free will. And as through the story, I see Adele continue to suffer through these awkward dinners. I get the impression that she's still fairly young, but then again, like there's a seed of doubt planted in my mind. So I do wonder about her age, but from a purely a process point of view, in your own mind's eye, when you were drafting this, just as kind of a placeholder to propel you and guide you through the drafting, did you have a sense of how many years she has suffered through this awkward situation, or was it murky, or did it even like fluctuate as you were writing it?
For me, she was 24.
Oh, okay.
So
So she is fairly young still.
She's fairly young, but
that's still a long time.
Yeah, she's kind of
a long time.
Yeah, she's kind of an old young person now at this stage because of she's got the kind of but she's young.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about there's a follow-up story, because that was a very the last line, like, I was only 17. It makes me think, well, what exactly happened? Yeah. But thank you so much for reading it and for answering our questions. I'm now going to mute everyone again and ask that after I do that Nigel unmutes himself. Our next section is our nonfiction section, and N.S. Thompson, known to his friends as Nigel, is our nonfiction editor, but he is reading his essay from the issue. So I'm going to be the one to introduce him and also to ask him some Q&A. Nigel joins us from England, proudly continuing the poetic contacts between the US and the UK that have developed so profoundly in the last century. However, it was while living in Italy that he had his road to Damascus moment, reading the poetry of Pier Paolo Pasolini, one of the most cutting-edge poets in the post-war period, using Dante's Terzarima for his critique of contemporary Italy. Here then is Nigel's critique of where poetry is today after the shock of COVID-19. And for me, the key words in his essay were craft and irreducibility, and the value he places on them, which he tells me goes back to seeing Pasolini using traditional techniques in a vibrant, modern way. So here is Nigel reading his essay, Beyond Criticism, Poetry and COVID-19, and that is on page 25 of the issue. Welcome, Nigel.
Hello, everyone. You can hear me? Nicole, can you hear me?
I can hear you and see you.
Great, good. Okay, well, hello, everyone. It's lovely to be part of this and to be partaking in this launch. It's great fun, and I'm mesmerized by everybody's faces. It's incredible technology. So this essay, I cut it down to about half. So I haven't got page numbers, but you can just listen or skip as you like. So it's a very muted polemic. It's basically a sort of flag waving for what used to be called the sort of the new formalism. But it raises lots of questions. I don't really answer them, so something to think about. Telling a good poem from bad has become ever more difficult. We have given such leeway to the form that it may exist without any identifying features. Enjoying this freedom of expression, many people write and publish under its mantle. Yet this has not expanded poetry's audience, only the number of practitioners. The reason may lie in the fact that a reader unsure of how to read, and even what they are reading, may well shy away. A poem today, then, is not defined by any particular pattern of words in a metrical or rhythmical sequence, even less in one that rhymes. Nor is it defined by any particular choice of words. There is no longer such a thing as poetic language or a poetic register, as in the past. So how does one even tell that a poem is a poem? Its presentation in a publication is one obvious way, and the intention of the author is another. This is a spillover from the visual arts. In 1961, Robert Rauschenberg, the painter, failing to produce a promised portrait of a prison art dealer, sent her a telegram that read, "This is a portrait of Iris Clert, if I say so." It is now considered a work of art in its own right, and follows the Duchamp tradition of declaring anything to be a work of art if the artist says so. We have had generations of self-declared poetry in this manner, and it continues. The problem is, however, that unless the reader knows what background the writer is writing against, then the point or the humor is lost. A sophisticated game is being played out, and the public has to know this. If not, the audience is lost. Art curators take great care to explain these contexts in wall chat, but it is the same with a joke. If you have to explain it, the joke is lost, and in poetry, a potential audience is lost. On the other hand, one could argue that there is no such thing as a bad poem, rather that it is no poem at all. In contrast to the visual arts, poetry is possibly the more demanding, in that there is no middle ground between success and failure. An amateur practitioner may produce a professional watercolor, botanical study, figure, or architectural drawing. Many successful works are now being produced under lockdown with tuition from television and social media tutors. Conversely, a proprietary or other sketch by an old master can be highly prized and valued as any other work of art. What is crucial here is the amount of skill and training involved. One would hardly expect a ballet, say, or an opera performance to be put on by people without the necessary skills or training. The same in the visual or dramatic arts. Yet it seems perfectly reasonable not to expect a poet to have the same skills in their craft. Indeed, craft is a term that is rigorously avoided. How this situation came about is unclear. What is certain in the current critical climate is that to expect the same level of skill or training would be tantamount to elitism, despite the prevalence of creative writing classes and courses. Kind of irony there. A tutor may help the student the better to express what the student wants to say, but depending on the student, this could be limiting them to a restricted campus. How often does the tutor turn around and suggest there may be another way of saying things, assuming both have a clear idea of what the piece of work may want to say? If this is not clear, then a potential lesson may be learned. But are alternatives offered? An academic environment puts a premium on a finished result. There is equally a problem if in a student accepting what the tutor says in order to gain a good grade. Will such a system produce only clones of the creative writing tutor? Do those tutors actually want clones? Perhaps it would be a good thing if creative writing were released from the aegis of academia and its protocols and allowed a different set of criteria. But with the emphasis on subjectivity, this ultimately leads back to the question of critical judgment. How do you judge the subjective? There seems to be no half measure with poetry, no gradient of values whereby a poem can be judged. It either works as a poem or it does not. If it does not, then it is not a poem. It is true we do have some halfway houses, so to speak, a rhyme, a ditty, and any number of light verse forms, such as the clericule and limerick. These latter can be more easily judged because there are technical considerations to be overcome, or perhaps subverted. And because they are humorous, subversion is fully encouraged, but the rules are known. The Rhymers Club, founded in 1892 by Yeats and others, was the last group of poets in the Anglophone world to express themselves in what came to be known as poetic language. It was high of reference and style, including tropes from the newly fashionable rediscovery of so-called courtly love and Arthurian legend, together with biblical and mystical imagery. Rightly, but mainly wrongly, this high style was one way of identifying the poem and judging its merit. With the coming of imagism in the next century, all that changed when Ezra Pound declared the Imagist poem to be an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. That's in a few don'ts by an Imagist in Poetry, March 1913. So, an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. Smack as it does of modern science or psychology, this definition, or even mini manifesto, did not actually create an immediate change towards modernity, which was already apparent in the work of Edwin Arlington Robinson and Robert Frost, but it led to the work of William Carlos Williams, among many others. At the time, Pound himself was still largely in his medieval phase, and thence to China, while others were still tantalizing. It took the trauma and horror of the Western Front, that is World War I, to bring real change, whereas the assault on language had already occurred in futurism, which advocated total freedom, about which Pound and Eliot remained surprisingly quiet. They had the catchword was parole in libertà, words in freedom, and the first Futurist Manifesto was published in 1909. So what's new? The end result of all this turmoil and change was that by 1920, say, anything could be a poem if you said it was. And thus readers were no longer confident in judging what they read, and thus sought direction from the criticism that Pound and Eliot were only too happy to supply. Alphabet soup of language poetry to the many current expressions of ethnicity, gender, and identity. All these can have their place in the audience, but as with the balkanization of anything, the various splinter groups set themselves up in opposition to each other, and voices in one camp are taken to be in competition with another. So, niche poet speaks to a niche audience, and the mutual virtue signaling is neatly encapsulated between the two. Thus, we have poetic closed shops, where critical judgment is neither encouraged nor permitted, and who would wish to see faults in a poem written about the coronavirus, well-meaning though it may be. T.S. Eliot once wrote that many things can be expressed in Scots which cannot be expressed in English at all. This could be modified to many things can be expressed in poetry that cannot be expressed in any other way. Indeed, I would say that the best way to tell whether a poem is good or bad is to ask whether it could be said in any other way. In any other way, that is, without loss of meaning or emotional response. One could call this the principle of irreducibility. If poetry is to survive, it needs readers. It also needs critical appraisal, offering guidelines where the general reader will not be afraid of entering and where they will find enough persuasive and intelligible works to draw them in, and where it can respond to challenging times for a wide audience, rather than representing the challenge of a single individual, or indeed a single individual poet. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Nigel. Now,
Nice.
as you know, I have many questions for you. my main question would be, can you help me with my cognitive dissonance? Because although I agree with so much of your essay, especially the aspects of craft and the concept of irreducibility, I also I wonder, is anything that gets more people interested in poetry and widens the audience a good thing? And how do I grapple with that, even though I also am someone who doesn't want to be an elitist, doesn't want to be the poetry police, or even worse, engage in a lot of that kind of mobbing that people engage in online when it comes to what they claim is critical analysis, but really just seems like mobbing. I have no desire to be a gatekeeper, because poetry is a house with so many rooms. And yet, you know, we have these issues of craft, irreducibility. Please help me with that.
Well, it's a real problem. It's a very good question, and I appreciate you asking it. I mean, the only analogy I can give is, say, you know, with wine, say, or even beer, that, you know, how do you learn about it? I mean, surely you want to drink a good wine. You could pay, you know, $30, $40 for a rocking horse, if that's the going. Anything from, you know, Sonoma or the Napa Valley, you know, I mean, you can pay a fortune for these things, and they're, you know, beautiful to drink. So, you know, do you then want to say, well, try a jug wine, you know? I mean, it's a problem. I mean, maybe you can start with jug wine and then go on to Napa Valley. I don't know. Certainly, I think that what one has to do is read as widely as possible, so that to get the range of what poetry you can do, so that you can go from, you know, William Carlos Williams to, say, Milton, and, you know, you make your own choice between, you know, well, you know, what we have centuries of poetry available, and of course we've got a lot more poetry available today. And that's what I'm addressing in this essay. There's a lot of poetry, and how does the beginning reader learn to negotiate? And I think you've got to decide which wine you like.
So you're saying that if
if
there are beginning poets that aren't paying a lot of attention to craft or concepts of the principle of irreducibility, it's because they're probably not reading as widely as they should be.
Yeah, I think you've got to read as widely as possible, whatever you're writing. And, you know, I mean, I was teaching creative writing here in Oxford sometimes, and we were doing a course in reading for writing. And I have to say, the people were very loath to read. And I got one guy, this was in prose, he said, well, can't you just tell us, you know, the 10 points on how to write a novel? And, you know, I gave up. I mean, this is, you've got to love reading. You have to love reading. You've got to read widely. I mean, you know, the essence of criticism is comparison. You know, you take one thing and look at another. If you're not happy with that, then I don't see there's much love of writing there, of literature. You've got to love literature, and I guess that, you know, there are plenty of very famous works that have been written just by an individual. I mean, a slave narrative or something like that. You know, these people have not had that privilege of being able to read widely, but they can write something that is absolutely vital and communicative. But you know, thankfully we've moved on away from that, so that, you know, when you have that privilege of being able to read, then I think it behooves you to you know, enjoy and read as widely as possible. I mean, you know, you mentioned gatekeepers. I think there is a problem with gatekeepers today who, you know, really don't know what they're looking for. They're looking for something that's fashionable, and don't read really critically in terms of literature. We might discuss that at the end. I don't know, but
that's interesting, because I was thinking of it more as, you know, people in a literary community who consider themselves gatekeepers, but you're saying it seems like you're talking about what's some of what's being published. Something you said reminded me of something I had said to my students, which was, if you want to write poems but you don't like reading poems, it's kind of like saying, well, I don't enjoy being a passenger in a car, but I would love to be a race car driver. So
yeah,
that's what
exactly. I mean, you know.
So what you're saying is popular poetry might not be it's not necessarily that so anything that gets more people interested in poetry and widens the audience might be a good thing, as long as people aren't limiting themselves to kind of one genre of poetry, and you're going into all the rooms in the house, not just one room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a great shame when I was thinking of the balkanization, splitting off all these different niche poetries. that only speak to a niche audience. That seems to me, you know, it's a shame. I think, you know, there's a tragic loss there of what you know, as human beings we can communicate to each other. And I think that you know, I don't know what other people would say, but I think that the idea of writing to a niche audience is not the way. I mean, you look at the history of writing, and there are people from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of minorities, but they, you know, they communicate to a wide audience, and I think that's what we want.
Thank you, Nigel, so much. This is a perfect segue into our next section, which is poetry, the poetry section. At this time, I'm going to ask if Richard would please unmute himself while I introduce him. In our next segment, we have 8 poets joining us. They will be introduced by Able Muse's new poetry editor, Richard Wakefield. Richard joins us from Washington State, where he is a professor of the humanities, currently in his 42nd year of teaching college. His forthcoming book is Terminal Park from Able Muse Press. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Nicole, and thank you very much. Am I audible?
You are audible.
I am audible. Very good, thank you.
And visible.
And visible. We'll, and that foregoing discussion was indeed a perfect segue into this next section. So I'm going to introduce Estill Pollock. This poem, if you're reading along in your hymnal, is on page 22, and this poem is called Warwick Street.
Thank you. As you say, this poem is Warwick Street. The old Reform Club percolates in late November light. Its stuccoed pediment, the mansard roof and dormers complement Palladian Beaumont. The hingeless gate betrays the pretty scene. Its cramp of rust and wet rot proves the Georgians were a bust. Aside the worn stone steps, the ironwork shales in pastry roughs. A notice on the door confirms a planning application for apartments no one can afford. The sales the starlings renegotiate. The rents high flyers stake to moneyed monuments. As we to these upcycled cemeteries, they too to Jacobeans in their time, and back to Tudors and a failed sublime of ratty thatch and stag hunts in the frieze. The dead in plague pits lined as neatly as a Shakespeare sonnet, framed through hazy glass. The buses terminate near Trafalgar, hard by Extinction's camp. We walk to work from there, past placards promising berserk environments, the planet's death, XR a token, superglued to London soot, a tide of air miles washing underfoot. In Warwick Street, 1,000 horses press to find the final parking space. They buck against the double yellows and the luck that leaves them in extremis, the duress of futures on another's terms. The sky is iron. The starlings close the deal and fly.
Thank you so much. And I would like to ask a question. Actually, I'd like to make a couple of observations. One will lead to a question. The last part of that, one of the things that I love to have happen to me in a poem is to get surprised in a way that then makes sense. To be a little startled and then to say, oh, but of course. And at the end of that first section, you have the the dead in plague pits lined as neatly as a Shakespeare sonnet, which is what I would call an extravagant simile. That is, it seems at first to reach almost impossibly far to find a parallel. And then suddenly history and literature all clicks into place as I read that. At the very beginning of the poem, a word that surprised me a little was the word percolates.
Yeah.
And I like it too. I can't say that it ever has yet quite resolved in the same way that Shakespeare plague pit simile did. Could you say something about how that word, maybe I'm looking with too fine a microscope here, but nevertheless, can you say something about how that word got in there? How that works for you?
Well, I suppose if you look at the opening line, the dilapidated building, it's a kind of metaphor for a ferment of ideas and ideals and that sort of thing that you associate with the early 19th century, late Georgian reform clubs, where politics and social change were discussed. But as the poem moves on in that first stanza, you see everything settling down. It's almost a kind of decomposition right in front of your eyes. The iron is decomposing in front of your eyes. The render is falling away. I suppose that's the idea behind the actual word. I didn't think too much of it, to be honest with you. It just popped up. I used it as is often the case. But that, I mean, I suppose the thing is, the message there, I guess, if there's a message, is just all things must pass. Mm-hmm. And some of the words chosen in particularly the first stanza reflect on that period of transition. But I would say that the poem that was submitted, you may remember, it was in 5 separate stanzas, and the editors had decided to present it in a kind of a binary appearance, which doesn't matter to me, because it's really a kind of psychogeography, really. They're not in opposition to each other. They actually are a mirror image of each other. You're looking at the cars, which are referred to really through their horsepower, and they reflect not only the modern sense of automotive progress or the stalled sense of modern culture, if you like, but also the wildness of a herd, desperate to get to something, but they don't know exactly what it is, some dream of a failed dream or fated world or something. So that's sort of the idea behind it, because the thing with XR and some other references there, it's our modern take on the same things the Georgians looked at and the Tudors and so forth. It's just our view of something that is immediate to us, arguably, and another generation, another 10 generations will look back and think how quaint that is. Look at those buildings decomposing into what's left of the earth, perhaps, who knows, but that was the observation I tried to make.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Nicole, do you want to ask now?
Sure, thanks. Thank you so much, Estill. I love how in line 5, it's not just rust, but it's cramp of rust, with that human word cramp. In writing about place, as you've done here, is there an essential question you ask yourself, or for poets who often put people at the center of their poems and for whom place might be more of a backdrop, what would you say to drawing them into writing about place?
I think place is more than place. It's a spiritual thing, but as I mentioned earlier, it's a kind of psychogeography. There's a visceral quality to everything, and you can drill down through it layer by layer to see what's behind every layer, and you can choose to what extent you want to examine it, how you want to share that, how you want to try to communicate that, and at what point it perhaps becomes too much in what you're trying to communicate in the poem, or if it is simply a ride and it's one series of images or metaphors that all link together and roll towards an inevitable conclusion. Not everything works the same way in every poem. Something that worked that way last poem would fail miserably on the next poem. So it has to be examined, I think, individually, depending on the place and the circumstances of the observation of that place.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Nicole, shall I go on now?
Sure.
Okay. So in your guidebook, we're on page 31. We have a poem by Dan Campion called The Gray Stone.
Can I be heard and seen?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for making me a part of this wonderful kickoff. I appreciate it very much. The Gray Stone. Some archaeologists are digging bricks from sand and clay right now. They excavate as long as budget holds and politics and sun and tides and wind cooperate. They'll build an image up from what they find of structures and their use. They'll populate whole towns, learn how they prayed and worked and dined, and daring censure may extrapolate. My aims are narrower. On Fremont Street, the gray stone where you lived still stands, its blocks of limestone lodged in place, a frozen fleet. Inside them, trade in words no spell unlocks. Perhaps when fallen, washed away, dissolved, they'll yield the terms on which our lives revolved.
Thank you. Thank you.
You did.
So I have an observation. One of the things that I love about this poem is the way that you make these sentences fit the lines fit the sentences so gracefully, and creating tension, a little bit of tension between the grammar and the prosody of the poem. And I think that gives it special music. For example, these sentences tend to be periodic sentences. We go from a capital letter to a period, a capital letter to a period, in almost in a colloquial way. The second from the last one that ends trade in words no spell unlocks is a little different. That becomes a more cumulative sentence. It adds a little bit as it goes, and it creates a sense for me that this writer now has perhaps slipped a little bit in that strict discipline of the sentences. Now there's a thought that's guiding him, or that's leading him, or that's luring him away from the more strict containment of a sentence. So that's just an observation. And if I'm misreading your poem completely, please don't say anything.
No. Thank you. Thank you for your very close and delicate reading. You know, I have been writing a great many poems addressed to the you, as in this one, my late wife, Joanne, who lived in this house in Wrigleyville in Chicago at the time that we first met in the 1970s. And her voice comes to me from time to time and adjusts the prosody that I'm working on. So you're quite right.
Oh, very nice. Actually, one of the things that I was curious about was the you, if that was something you were willing to divulge, and I appreciate you doing that. And then another, this is perhaps a smaller issue, but in the, where are we now? Oh, they'll populate whole towns, learn how they prayed and worked and dined, and daring censure may extrapolate. I was curious about the daring censure. It sounds like there's a whole paragraph in there. What is your sense of that? What are we being hinted at?
There's a whole book review. Steve Brissett, who is a fellow graduate of the University of Chicago with me, he wrote a book about the dinosaurs. He's teaching paleontology in Scotland. And he recently reviewed a couple of books about paleontologists. And one of the funniest comments that Steve makes is that the paleontologists are at each other's throats with those little fine picks and brushes and so forth, that it's a very competitive and disputatious discipline. And this is coming not from me, but from somebody who's more or less in that fold, depending on your time scale. And so, yeah, the people who build up from, the physical culture, they do their best, but who knows? And that's part of what I'm trying to get at with the poem, is that when these heavy stones like frigates just dissolve into nothing, that will be a resolution of sorts.
Well, that's delightful. Thank you very much. And Nicole?
Well, I had a very similar question to Richard's, but Dan, you've answered it. So I'll just make one brief comment, which is that one of the reasons why I was so curious about the you that the speaker addresses in line 10 was that the way that you're describing the archaeology and the bricks and everything there in line 10, it's that you is really smack dab in the middle of the line. It's not exactly in the middle of the poem, but it's almost like a hidden artifact within the poem that we unearth as we read, and then we kind of dust it off and say, oh, what is this you that has been kind of quietly snuck in there? And so I was going to ask about the you, but thank you very much for explaining that to us.
Thank you.
Well, let us move on. I'm on a poem by J.C. Scharl. This is called The Trout. For those of you who are reading along, it's on page 51.
Hi, everyone. This is Jane. That's what the J stands for, is Jane. Dan, I'm actually really glad that I get to read after you, because I wanted to tell you, I sat with your poem for a really long time after I first read it, and just really, I spent a lot of time trying to understand the relationship between the two halves, and I just really appreciate all the time and effort that you put into that. It's a beautiful piece. So thanks for writing it, and thanks for reading it to us today. I'm assuming you can all hear me after that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So here's my poem. It is called The Trout. I plucked it from its lake, burning cold, smoke haze rising from the silver surface that imitates the sky. Now I hold it, red-licked gills throbbing without purpose, beneath the curving ridge of teeth, cupped around the dark pass of the throat. Deep down I'll find the iridescent gut, tight packed with amber roe, and the fillets crowned with the mud vein. But first, it's got to die. My father says, you want it to be quick, and demonstrates the snap against the stone. I grip it hard. There in the opaled eye is all the sky above me. I grasp and flick. The mirrored sky contracts, clouded, unknown.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I'd I love the iridescent guts. That's another of those places where two words got joined in a way that I would never have expected, and that seems perfect. I don't know anything about fish anatomy. Is there actually a thing called a mud vein?
Yeah, there is. There's this little vein that runs right across on the backbone, and it's called a mud vein. It's kind of brown and stringy. Sometimes it's still attached to a fillet. So if you get a fillet from the grocery store, there might be a real fine little vein across the top.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but I'm also thinking that just sounds like something that a poet would have to invent, a mud vein. When a poem is told in the past tense, one of the things that occurs to me is whether we can infer the time lapse. How long are we thinking? Is that something that you could divulge, or that you have a sense of in this poem of how far back is this poet reaching?
That's a great question. I was about 6 when this happened, but obviously that was a long time ago. So the tense for this poem was the thing I worked on the most, of having the first sentence in a different tense than the rest of the poem. And I struggled a lot with how to bring the reader into the space with me. So I'm trying to pull the reader pretty far back. I don't know if it succeeds or not, but that was the attempt.
Well, I certainly think it does. For me, there's a sense that a poem that's told in the past tense isn't merely about something that's in the past. It's about everything that's happened since then.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. And the way that past then has been conditioned and reconditioned by everything that's happened in the meantime. And this poem then seems to reach back to early in a long process of living with this memory, even what would seem at first to be a relatively small one. So thank you very much for that. Nicole, would you like to add anything?
Sure, thank you. Jane, the poem just builds and builds, and then in the transition from line 12 to 13, forget about the fish stopping breathing. I think I nearly stopped breathing there with, wow, how the poem just breaks open for me at that image of there in the opal eye is all the sky above me. Maybe the rhyme of sky and eye just really got me, but that for me was the minute that the whole poem broke open. So my question is, was there any particular image in this poem that to you was the genesis? In terms of that opal eye image, did it manifest for you early on, or was it a latecomer?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to recall the construction of the poem. I'm pretty sure that image was in there from the beginning. I think in one version, actually, that image was the opening image. And then it got moved to the end. I actually studied a lot of fish poems to write this. There's that famous Mary Oliver fish poem, and then there's I think Elizabeth Bishop has 2 fish poems. Seems like especially female poets often have a fish poem. This is interesting. But yeah, you're right.
Where placement is now, like at that point, it's such a culmination of the poem, and it, for me, it's one of the most memorable images from it in a poem that's already very visceral and vivid. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Our next reader is Anna M. Evans. This poem is called Mammogram After the Death of a Friend, and this is on page 60.
Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a video that Anna created for us because she had an unexpected family matter that was very pressing she had to take care of, but she kindly offered to record a video. And I said, okay, as long as you're doing that, I might as well give you my Q&A questions. So she even answered that for us. So first I'll read the question for you, and then hopefully I can successfully screen share and show you the great video that she made us. It's only a couple of minutes long. So the question I asked her was, the literal and figurative nakedness of your poem brings to mind a question I was asked a few weeks ago during a creative writing classroom visit on Zoom. And it was so authentic an inquiry from a student that I said, I want to ask this of every poet I know now. And maybe some of you would care to answer it in the follow-up Q&A also at the end of the event. The student's exact wording was, how do you protect yourself from feeling vulnerable when writing? And I love that, because it doesn't just apply to newer poets, but to poets at any stage in their development. So if you bear with me for 1 second, I am going to try to access, this video. And it's just loading. And I'm going to, it says you are screen sharing. Okay, can everyone see the video?
Yes.
You see Anna's face. Okay, so I'll press play. Here we go.
The poem I'm going to read from the issue is called Mammogram After the Death of a Friend. And anyone who is at all familiar with me probably instantly knows that the friend in question is Kim Bridgeford. So I'm going to read it, and then I'll talk a little bit about it in the context of a question that Nicole Caruso Garcia has posed to me. The text-gloved hands pull at my breast like pork. The plexiglass descends on tender flesh. I feel the awkwardness with casual talk. The plates revolve with their relentless swish. I've done this every year for more than 10. It hurts more than the pinch they always claim. But I know next year I'll be back again. And then I think, I wish she'd done the same. Because she's dead. Breast cancer. Metastatic. I hear her voice again. It's everywhere. Undiagnosed because asymptomatic. Until it wasn't. She didn't have a prayer. I'm angry at her. I'll admit, if pressed. I step back, turn, offer the other breast. So this is actually the second poem that I wrote for Kim. The first one was a villanelle called Why, which I read a couple of times at memorial services for her. And that one was just raw grief. So I guess I was going through the stages. The question that was asked is, how do you protect yourself from feeling vulnerable when writing? And my answer to that is, you don't. You shouldn't. Now, obviously, when you're writing autobiographical poetry, which a lot of us do, even when we pretend we don't, it's really important to let that vulnerability through. But even when you're writing other kinds of poetry, I write a lot of persona poems, which are not in my own voice or to do with my own history, but you have to let that compassionate human side of yourself out to really interact with the poem. And I'm going to tell you now that when I wrote the villanelle for Kim, it was the first time that I actually allowed myself to cry. This one, I actually allowed myself to feel a little bit angry. And I think that's right. That's what we should do. I have, of course, forgiven her since.
Okay. Wow, that was great. I'm so glad that Anna could join us in spirit. And as many of you know, Kim Bridgeford was a good friend of mine as well. So this poem and Anna's reading of it and her comments means so much to me to have with us today. And that does bring us to our next reader. If you would.
Actually, I would like to just.
Oh, sure, to comment.
This seems almost sacrilegious in the light of what we've been reading about. But I want to point out in this poem, a line that I think is a wonderful line that would be awful if it weren't in the context of this poem. And the line is undiagnosed because asymptomatic. In the midst of a poem that has so many one-syllable words, so much colloquial language, right there I hear a doctor, a physician, making a quick little explanation. Well, why didn't you die? Well, it was undiagnosed because asymptomatic. And then we're back to those terrific, there's just, to my ear, a little shift in voice there that is terrifically moving.
That's a
Let's
great
go on. We have on page 69, we have Bruce Bennett. And his poem is called Final Call for David Berman.
Can you hear me?
We certainly can.
Okay. Of course, I didn't know wasn't aware of the order, or I didn't actually know it, but my poem goes very well with Anna's poem. And this is written to my very close friend, David Berman, whom I met in Archibald McLeish's class in 1961, and we were first readers of each other's poems until he passed away in early spring in 2017. So I have his picture from his memorial service on my bookcase in back of me. And this is the last time I spoke with him. It's called Final Call. Your voice was cheerful. You were on a roll, reciting favorite poems you knew by heart. Millay, McLeish, Lowell, Robinson, each whole, delivered flawlessly. I played the part I often did of listener. I knew this time was different though. This was an act of courage, of defiance. This time you were proving you could do it still, a fact by no means certain. As I held the phone, I thought, I must remember this. My friend was sharing something he and he alone could take such pride in, knowing that the end was near. I listened and I did my best to reassure him he had aced the test.
Thank you. This poem speaks to me an experience that I suppose, well, many poets have as they move along in years. And I had an almost identical experience with another friend, who would call me sometimes at 2 a.m, somewhat inebriated, but still proud of his ability to recite whole passages of Beowulf and Chaucer and everything. Yeah, I can see some smiles. You know who I'm talking about. And at the same time, when we had these conversations, well, they were largely one-sided conversations. At the same time, I wondered, why are we doing poetry when there's something else that needs to be said here? Or something else that we're trying to say or aren't able to say? Why are we using poetry to do it? Or maybe poetry is the only thing that allows us to do it. So Bruce, what I wondered from you is, what is, maybe this is too close a question. What is the poem you would read or would recite?
If I were the one making the call?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. I was interested in your observation though, because David, I think he wasn't exactly in denial, but my poem begins, your voice was cheerful.
Yeah.
And he was very happy in this phone call. And one of the things about our 55-year-old relationship that I was very aware of, and certainly afterward, is that we never really were that personal. We shared each other's poems for all that time and said everything we say in poems. We almost never talked personally about well, he was a lawyer. This was part of the way he was. But he also was someone who had very high standards for himself and other people. And so in a way, this really was, he was performing. He was showing he could still do it, even though he was denying that there was something, you know, he thought he was going to beat it still. He had pancreatic or esophageal cancer. And this was, I don't remember exactly how many months before, but it wasn't too long before he died in early spring of 2017. So I think he wasn't acknowledging in any way this was a final call, but he was showing that he was still who he was and that he expected to continue to be that. So I didn't answer your question. I will think about it. I'll let you know.
I have one other question, actually.
Do not go gentle into that good night now.
And this is an unfair question, I suppose, because it could lead us into all kinds of places. But I hinted at it a little earlier. Are these poems a way that we avoid saying what we need to say, or are they the best way we have to say what we need to say?
I think that for us, for David, the kind of person he was, and probably I am, they may have been the best way to say it rather than, I suppose. I do wish afterward we had talked more, and I have a whole chapbook of poems that was published the year of his death called First Reader. And they talk a lot about my wishing we had been a little closer in terms of actually speaking about things. I'm curious in some ways because it would have been really interesting, but we didn't do it in all that time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nicole?
Bruce, one of the things that I find so beautiful about this poem in particular is that in a private moment in this poem, the speaker performs one of the biggest kindnesses we can do for another human being, which is to make them feel truly seen, and not just seen, but like seeing the very best parts of them, despite a grave situation. And then when line 10 states, I thought, I must remember this. I mean, there's so many ways of interpreting that, but it makes me think of one facet of the poet's role, which is poet as documentarian. So I was wondering if you might be able to comment on that, like to what degree you embrace or embody that role, or if you were thinking about that at all during this poem, like this was a special moment and you wanted to preserve it, encapsulate it in this poem.
I think that's exactly what happened. I didn't know it was a final call. I did expect to be talking to him again, but the way that he was reciting poems, he did have a phenomenal memory. He could go on and on in Latin as well as English.
Wow.
But and he prided himself on this. He really had a prodigious memory, and I think he was showing himself more than me that he could still do this. But I very distinctly remember listening to him. I didn't say very much, I just listened. And I remember thinking, I have to remember this, even though I did not know this was a final call. I wasn't thinking I'll write a poem about it, but after he died, I remembered it very clearly. It was a final call. He was performing, and I was very glad I was able to reassure him about that.
That you were the audience he wanted to perform
I was
for.
the main audience. I think I was always the main audience for his poetry, and he was, if not the main one for mine, he was the first one and read everything I wrote, and I write a lot. So
that's a beautiful
thing. This was the two of us sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next poem is, it's on page 73. It's called The Empty Lap of Luxury by Barbara Lydecker Crane.
Thank you, Nicole and Alex and Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just read the epigraph of this poem first. And actually, even before that, I'll tell you that it's a blend of fact, assumption, and invention. And the epigraph reads, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, a painting by Thomas Gainsborough, England, about 1750. The empty lap of luxury. It started well enough. My father owed a debt to hers, and so I said I'd paint the pair. They posed on land that was bestowed on them, 3,000 fertile acres. A faint disdain dimmed her eyes and chilled her smile at landless me. She shimmered in her gown beside her rumpled hunter husband while I painted this unspoken dressing down. The gunpowder pouch that dangled off her chap became a limp but sporting specimen. To fill in Mrs. Andrews' empty lap, they asked for flowers. I would not give in. A fresh-killed pheasant, I insisted. Deadlock. A shame she wouldn't hold a lifeless cock. Of course, lifeless cock is nothing but a dead bird.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing
That's
else.
right. I think this, this poem is about a lot, but tone comes through so wonderfully in this. And what I wonder is when did it come to you? Did the idea of the tone occur to you first, or was that something that emerged as you contemplated the viewpoint of the painter?
Thanks. It emerged as I researched and thought about it. And I must confess that in my research, deep down on like page 10 of my search, I found a blog where a particular writer years ago suggested that he might have had some sexual innuendos in this painting. And he talked about the gunpowder pouch. I don't think he used the word lifeless cock. I think that was mine, but I know he talked about the pouch and had the idea that Gainsborough was resentful of this couple. I do know he had a body sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there's reason to put that last line as his words, although it is my invention.
Okay. Okay.
But thank you about the tone. I did want very much to sound like I might have been him.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Nicole?
And that ties in with a question that I had, because Richard spoke of tone, and like here you've given us a poem that really breathes, you know, and it has a brutally perfect ending, just brutally perfect. Despite having been an art history minor and read many ekphrastic poems, I have found that not many ekphrastic poems have really resonated me with in the past, which is so different from this one. So to the doubting Thomases, what would you say to entice them to write ekphrastic poems? Or is there a gateway or a key or an essential question you ask yourself that allows you to like enter that world and really make an ekphrastic breathe as you've done here?
Well, thank you. I've written like 60 of these such poems in the last 2 years. I've really been in this mode of researching a lot until with the artwork that interests me, I try to find a correlation between the painter's life and what he or she might be saying about the painting. Rather than my own reaction to it, I want to try to get into the mind of the artists.
So a lot of the inspiration comes from like the combination of research in conjunction with the art form and how they.
Yeah, exactly. You put that very well.
Thanks. Because I don't read a lot of them, and I thought, well, why is that? Maybe it's because I'm not doing the research. I'm looking at a piece of, you know, sculpture or painting, whatever, but I haven't gone down the rabbit hole, and I'm sure there are many, many rabbit holes. Do you find that happens also, where you just get so caught up in the research?
Yeah, but what seems to happen, I mean, some poems, of course, come out better than others, but what seems to happen is that if I research it long enough, I come upon something that's going to be the nugget that's really going to get me you know, into the poem.
That's great. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Our next reader, we're up to page 74 of our hymn book. And we're going to hear from John Beaton. His poem is called Wolf's Clothing. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Richard. And I must say that I saw you smoking the pipe earlier. Brought back fond reminiscences because I used to do that, but I gave up because I didn't have the willpower to continue. So I admire you. My poem's about a form of hunting that went on that goes on in Central Asia. Goes back over 1,000 years at least, and persists in some form to this day. Wolf's clothing. And I was drawn to it because of the skill of the hunter and also the skill of the weapon he uses. He's trained a golden eagle to figurehead his glove, a harbinger of havoc perched on the world's roof. He leashes it with leather and rides across the steppes, arm raised, its wings extended until they reach the wolves. He pulls the thong, releases the raptor from his wrist. It beats its wings and sailplanes, and though the prey is fast, the bird with ease outpaces one loping carnivore and sinks a grapnel talon around its snout and jaw. They crash land, writhing, thrashing. The wolf is stronger, but its claw-encaged carnassials and canines cannot snap. The eagle's ripping beak hook tears at its face and eyes as panic struck and scrabbling the hapless canid twists. It ends as the Berkuchi leaps from his breaking horse and stabbing with his caitier adds to his stock of furs. The snow is churned and bloody as off the hunter rides a splash of savage beauty in his Kazakh furs and hides.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for a wonderful lesson in a form of hunting that I had never had any inkling of. And it's wonderful material for this poem. And as I hear you read it, my question is reinforced. How did you decide that these trimeter lines and these 4-line stanzas were somehow going to be the form that worked best for this?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is that most of my poetry, including this, was written using a voice recorder while running on the shorelines here. You're a long distance runner too, I know, Richard.
Yes, that's right.
So that imparts a certain rhythm to the way the words come out. The second thing is that the 4-line stanzas consist of 2 couplets. And in each couplet, there are 2 trimeter lines, but the first ends on a feminine ending and the second ends on a masculine. So it's da-da, da-da, da-da-da, da-da, da-da, da-da. The snow is churned and bloody as off the hunter rides. And that to me suggested the motions that come up in the poem, the horseman riding, the eagle flying, beating its wings, and the wolf running. So usually with meter and I just fall into a pattern as the words come out, but then I sort of stand back and say, does that sort of fit the poem? And in this case, I thought it did. There's very little rhyme early on, but I find that escalating rhyme brings a bit of closure. So there's rhyme at the end that sort of creeps up so that at the end it's the snow is churned and bloody as off the hunter rides, a splash of savage beauty in his Kazakh furs and hides, although that's not present earlier on.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. I think that it almost, to me, the sound of it could almost be a translation. That is, it sounds almost as if you're mimicking or picking up on some older traditional verse form. And it seems to work just especially well with this subject. So thank you for that. Nicole?
Thank you. John, it's so interesting how you talk about the galloping, because it definitely does feel like that. You had said that you found this form of hunting with the eagle very interesting, and that's why you were writing the poem. Is it that you saw, let's say, a documentary or a photograph or something that sparked it? Because in my mind, what I was reminded of reading this was there's this Mongolian folk metal band, like heavy metal music, but that's also Mongolian folk music, and they're called the Hu Band, H-U, and they've got these really neat videos where their instruments have got all these like ornate carvings on the heads of their instruments and beautiful vistas, and I could see that in my mind coupled with this as I was reading it. And I thought, well, I wonder if John's listening to that too. I thought maybe it would be an unlikely coincidence. But was there a particular film or news article or photograph or something that made you say, oh, here's my next topic?
Yeah, you're very much on the right track. I mean, the main catalyst for it is a YouTube video about the hunting, and it's got old tracks of actual wolf hunts with the eagles. And coincidentally, it's accompanied by Mongolian throat singing.
Oh, okay. And that's what this band does, Mongolian throat singing, yeah.
Which makes it quite dramatic. But my connection with it, the reason I was looking at that is I've got a bit of a connection with eagles, because running the beaches here on Vancouver Island, I see them all the time. And you know, year round, there are various natural events, like at the salmons, when the salmon run in the fall, I've counted over 80 eagles at a sighting. And we've just had the herring spawn here, and the gulls come in thousands and eat the herring spawn, and the eagles like some of that food, but they like it pre-packaged. So they drop I've seen them drop from hundreds of feet up and hit a seagull in mid-flight, full speed, and just take it out of the air, because now they've got a package full of herring roe. And I've seen eagles take fish from just below the surface without breaking flight. So I've got a bit of a connection with eagles. That's why I was researching them. And I've also seen, we have wolves out here. I've seen them in the back of our property, running through the frost at night. So I have a bit of a connection with eagles and wolves. So it led me to be very interested in this kind of hunting, where lots of things happen. I mean, the hunter trains the eagle. I never thought that would possibly be possible.
Because they're enormous birds. I mean, like this poem prompted me to look at those photos, and it's just incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, the golden eagles, the females are bigger than the males. They go to about 15 pounds. And of course, they're the perfect weapon. There's no range limitation. They follow the wolf and they bring it down. And I thought it was amazing that the eagles have figured out how to bring down a much larger animal by placing the talons around the snout and therefore neutralizing its main weaponry. And then there's an irony in the wolf, which is kind of regarded as the apex predator in a lot of places here, because even though they're bears, a wolf pack will take down a bear, is now the prey. So it resonated with me in a lot of respects and made me interested in looking at the movie. But when I saw it, I just thought, I'll just tell the story of what happens and leave it to the reader, like Lorna was saying, you know, that you should leave the reader to do some of the work themselves.
Yeah, and your connection with the animals makes it, you know, so cinematic and wonderfully visceral. And in terms of, as you say, leaving the reader with questions, it did make me wonder things like, you know, in earlier times, there was much less distance between humans and their food sources and their sources of clothing. And, you know, our creature-based food and clothing supply. And in this poem, it's all right there. So I didn't know if it was a commentary on that, because it doesn't seem like you're necessarily trying to do that. You're just kind of bringing this visceral cinematic experience to us and letting us perhaps draw our own conclusions.
Yeah, that's definitely at the back of my mind. I like the idea that people continue to feel a connection with nature and actually to recognize its savagery, because you know, ungulates are fine. We've got deer. I've got deer outside my window just now, and they're gentle, but lots of animals are pretty savage out there. And yeah, even the trout.
Even the savage trout?
Which eats mayflies and other small fish.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Susan McLean. Her poem is a translation from Rilke called Imaginary Life History.
This is one of his late poems. It was not collected during his lifetime. He wrote it in 1923 while he was staying at a sanatorium on the shores of Lake Lucerne. Imaginary Life History. First, a childhood, limitless and free of goal and renouncing. Oh, unconscious bliss. Suddenly, limits, fear, school, drudgery, the fall into temptation and sharp loss. Defiance, bent, the child becomes the bender, revenging on others what he suffered through. Loved and dreaded, savior, wrestler, winner and conqueror, inflicting blow on blow. And then alone in vastness, light and cold, yet deep within the person's grown-up state, a gasping for the first, the world of old. Then God leapt out from where he lay in wait.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I have not successfully translated anything in my life. And I'm wondering, as I read this poem and as I hear you read this poem, do you feel that you discovered new things about the poem as you translated it? Or was there something in the poem you felt didn't carry over? Or perhaps something that you feel you were able to do with this poem that wasn't in the original?
Well, every act of translation is an act of discovery. One of the reasons that I translate Rilke is that I don't understand him until I translate him. I've found a lot of other translations disappointing in different ways. And so the only way I can grapple with what he's actually saying is by trying to translate it myself. But I wouldn't do that if there wasn't something that was grabbing me already about the original poem. So I latch on to what I've picked up from the other translations and from reading and thinking about it. But then as I'm actually translating, I'm discovering things about it as I go.
Thank you. I'm thinking of Nigel's comment on irreducibility in his essay. And also thinking, when I just last quarter, I finished, I taught the Introduction to Shakespeare class again. And one of the tropes that I get over and over again from my students is a quotation from Hamlet maybe, and then they say, well, what Shakespeare's trying to say here is, and I, of course I try to be very gentle about that, but I assume Shakespeare's actually saying exactly what he wants to say and that it isn't reducible. It isn't the same thing if you try to reduce it. What other poems in this genre do you have a series of poems by Rilke? I know that we saw a few others. I saw a few others.
Yeah. I didn't originally plan this when I started translating him. I was just intrigued and I wanted to see what I thought he was saying. But I got rather addicted to translating him. So as I went along, I started doing more and more poems from his new poems. And eventually I thought, well, I've translated so many of them now, I'd better try and do the whole thing, which is 2 volumes and 189 poems. So I'm still working my way through it, but I am hoping to do the entire new poems.
And I'm going to sneak in one more question. This poem, among the things that I like about this poem, is that it's a fairly vernacular poem. That is, it's not the language is largely everyday language. Do you feel that you represented Rilke's register that way? In his German, do you feel that that's the same or similar?
I think it's a very straightforward language. Sometimes he's obscure, but most of the time he's using ordinary language to say very complicated things.
Right.
So what's complicated about it isn't usually the words, it's the ideas that he's trying to convey through those words.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nicole?
Susan, I'm wondering was there a particular part of this poem that ran the risk of being lost in translation, as they say? Like, was there any particular part that was sticky where you knew, oh, if this isn't translated a certain way, it'll just be lost on the audience? And there might not be, but as an alternate to that question, if that's not the case, is there an epiphany or an insight that came to you, in the process of translating not just this poem, but as being a translator of poetry, but one that you feel would really benefit any poet who's writing in their mother tongue? So something that occurred to you as a translator, but something that was an epiphany or a piece of insight that you think really would benefit all poets.
I think in this particular poem, the idea of ambush, and specifically ambush by God, is one of the things that you could translate in other ways, but if you don't get that idea of God is ambushing you, then you really missed what's going on here. So trying to find a way that I could get ambush, which doesn't rhyme with anything, into the conclusion of this was one of the big challenges to actually make it work.
And could it be interpreted as a positive or negative in the end? I mean, what does it mean? It's something that we don't really experience. Like, you could be ambushed by a mugger, but being ambushed by God, what does that even mean? I mean, do you think that it can be one, the other, or both things?
I think that Rilke is working through his very complex relationship with Christianity in this particular poem, and that it is a negative, actually. He was not a believer, and yet he carried the Luther Bible with him everywhere he went, and he wrote lots and lots of poems about angels and about biblical stories. So he himself is in a battle to the death with God, and he is at a sanatorium. He is ill as he is writing this poem. And this whole idea, all my life I've been fighting God and God's going to get me anyway. That's what I was getting out of this.
Because when I looked in the original translation, the literal translation, it did say ambush. So I said, oh, look at how Susan said laying in wait, but that's not any less menacing than ambush. It's okay, someone's gonna get you.
Yeah.
But I was trying to look for an upside to it, like, oh, he's laying in wait for you. Is there another way to look at it? Probably not. It's probably menacing. And is there something that that was an insight into writing where you thought to yourself, hey, if it weren't for the fact that I'm a translator, I would have never realized X, Y, or Z? Like a special moment that you've had as a translator?
All I can say is that Rilke's way with the metaphor is very alien to my own way with metaphors. So it's a constant revelation to see how he is using this. And I guess I have learned a lot about how you can use metaphor just by trying to translate the way he's doing it.
Interesting. Thank you so much. And now we're going to do something radical here. We're going to unmute everybody, or ask everyone to, can I ask everyone to unmute yourselves? That's probably what I need to do here. I'm a novice at this hosting thing, but if you all unmute yourselves, can we give everyone a big round of applause?
Terrific.
Noise.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we will open the floor up to general follow-up questions from everyone before Alex wraps up and takes us back to Earth from our launch.
I have a little comment, an observation more than anything for Susan. That part about God lying in ambush reminded me of a book I read a long time ago by a British comedian, Spike Milligan, one of the goons. And he wrote satires on various famous novels, Frankenstein, Lady Chatterley's Lover, and one of them is the Bible. And in the Bible, he actually has God as a character who is lying in wait, trying to ambush people and catch them out. He's jumping out from behind bushes, sort of saying, gotcha. I thought it was kind of interesting that he had the same idea. Anyway, just a comment.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I come up with a yellow frame. I agree with Susan about the difficulty of Rilke's poetry, and I think you've done a wonderful job, especially in getting the rhyme and pararhyme and making it seem quite natural. And so I just want to say, well done. I mean, without being patronizing, I'm sorry, but you know, how else to say? I think you did a great job. And he's a very difficult poet to translate, and I've read at least half a dozen, and I've never been satisfied. And I found this one very satisfactory.
Well, thank you.
Going to Bruce's poem, I thought that I must remember this. Immediately it came to my mind as time goes by. You must remember this, and I thought that really was an added resonance to it. I don't know if that was something that you were thinking of, Bruce.
No, I wasn't thinking of that, actually. I guess it's just a common enough phrase. It did occur to me, though, that I did have to remember it. It adds a little something.
Well, sometimes you get these, added. Yeah.
Sometimes had the feeling that when I'm watching something, this is a poem. I have got to commit this to memory. Right in the middle of it, it is an experience that strikes me as something that is the seed of a poem.
Can I ask a question for Nigel?
Yeah, sure.
So, because you say if poetry is to survive, it needs readers. I think there's been a lot of more interest in poetry lately. Well, it might be just from me because I read it, but and I think people are reading more since COVID or whatever. But do you feel like that poetry needs more readers? Do you think we need more to give it more than it's been getting more audience, more outlet? Do you think it needs?
We can't get. We can't get enough.
Yeah. But do you think it's going to, because it says if it's to survive, do you think it's going to kind of a downside? It's going to a bad time, or like not as popular as it used to be? Or
no, good question, Lorna. Yeah, my worry is, as I said in the essay, that there's a kind of a breakup into these niche audiences. And I wish we would be, more together in poetry. I think that there's a lot of kind of unhelpful, competition that people, there's
I mean, it's not a community as such anymore.
different camps and different. Sorry.
Do you mean it's not as a?
Sorry?
It's not so much a community anymore? Do you mean something like that? Like it's.
Yeah. I think that I think that's a loss. I think, as I said, you can get sort of a small group of people reading one kind of poetry, and they won't look at anything else. And that's obviously shutting your eyes to an awful lot of other work. And I don't know about novel readers. I mean, obviously I'm a novel reader myself, but they seem to be more eclectic. They'll have a go at any kind of novel.
But there's so much opportunity to be eclectic now.
Maybe I'm wrong. My worry is that people are narrow. That yeah, there is, but people are not taking it.
Well, I don't know. I guess we'd have to survey everyone, but I mean, I will read anything I can get my hands on, and I want to absorb its powers so I can use them myself. And I mean, there is a lot of value in reading anything, even if it's something that's not your particular style or taste. You could have a eureka moment. I mean, I was looking through a literary magazine once where I was reading, and I thought, I don't understand this poem. This is weird. It's written in a strange style. I don't know what it's talking about. But that poem was the poem that later, months later, when I was washing the dishes or something, I had a breakthrough in a draft of my own where suddenly, because of that poem, I thought, oh my gosh, now I know what I need to do with my draft. And it wasn't one of those, because it was a cautionary tale, don't do this. It was that part of what that author was doing in that strange poem that I didn't even like. It was the breakthrough moment for my own draft that never would have happened if it weren't for that poem. So, but there's so much available to us online that, we can read more widely than ever before and have poetry communities from all corners of the globe, more so than ever before.
Yeah, I think, thinking about it, there is a problem. We do talk in this country of, I'm sure it's the same in the States, culture wars. And I think that as soon as somebody sees a poem meter, or if they can recognize meter, rhyme and meter, form, they won't read it. They think it's, that classic thing that somebody said, many, many years ago, that, writing a sonnet is a fascist act. And of course, that really pisses me off. But it's that kind of narrow-mindedness that people won't venture into other poetries or other languages even. I mean, I think that translating poetry is a really helpful thing for the.
I mean, there is some bias toward form, I think. Well, I mean.
Well, there's a lot here, and
with the bias toward form, I mean, even if a journal says. Even if a journal says, they prefer free verse, unless they say we absolutely will not publish form, I'll send them form anyway and just try to slip it in under the radar and see if they even notice. Because if it's blank verse, if it doesn't have rhyme, they might not even realize. And before you know it, they've accepted it and they've come over to the dark side. But also I've been to readings where if I read something that has rhyme, people will come up to you and give you kind of a backhanded compliment, like, oh, we liked your poems. It was, which kind of surprised us because typically things that rhyme are like terrible. And that you're just like, thank you. You don't know how to react.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to be the poster child for form being okay or something.
I've had reviews like this where the people say, well, gosh, this guy, he writes in rhyme and meter. He's writing in, ottava rima. And, well, it worked, and you think, okay. But you've got to kind of make it new. And I think that's a problem, that people are not wanting to make it new, and that we've kind of spread it all so thinly now that you know, it's difficult to you know, get people to sort of examine lots of different ways of writing poems. I mean, I'm a great fan of the prose poem, and I like to mix prose poetry, prose elements with mythical elements. So there's still lots of things to explore.
Any other questions? Maybe questions for Alex about submissions or upcoming issues, or Alex, are you ready to wrap us up?
In that case, since there's no other question, I guess I will just have to thank everyone who came to listen to us this afternoon, and all the readers, and all of those of you subscribers or who have the new issue. So it was a really great event, and our very first Zoom launch event, actually. And so I'll just remind you all to check out the new issue, or subscribe, or submit. And all the links, you can find them at the Able Muse website, which is ablemuse.com. So just the way it sounds. And also, I should remind you that we have entries for the Able Muse Book Award, which is still open for another couple of days because of the extension. So if you have a poetry manuscript you want to enter into that contest, well, there's still time. So with that, I thank you all for your support of Able Muse, and for all of you from all over the world, like Nigel from UK, and Estill, and Nageen, who just left because it's, I guess, past midnight in India now. So thank you all for coming up here. And of course, John from Canada. So thank you all, and hope to see you for the next event. And I should have the recording for this event maybe in a couple of days or so, and I'll give you a notice when that happens. So thank you, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank
you,
you.
Alex.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
also,
Bye-bye.
I should say thank you,
Bye.
Nicole.
Bye-bye.
For the great listening
Oh,
job.
you're welcome. And thank you
Thanks,
for
everybody.
bearing with me and answering
Happy
all our Q&A
spring.
questions.
Happy Easter.
And everyone, happy Easter and be well.
You
Yes.
are everyone. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Great. Well, thank you again, Nicole, and
Thanks for inviting me to host.
and see you at the usual places. Eh?
Yes. Yes. Have a great Easter. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.